Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Recovery Summit presentation, Adolescent Substance Use Trends, Understanding and Addressing Emerging Patterns. This webinar is part of a series hosted annually by St. Clair County Community Mental Health during the month of September, which is National Recovery Month. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded on the CMH YouTube channel for future reference. Please feel free to use the chat box for all questions or comments. Our presenter will be answering questions as time allows. Continuing education credits are offered for today's presentation. If you are requesting professional credits, you must remain on the webinar the entire time and complete the survey at the end of the presentation to receive credit. Our presenter today is Maddie Tortomasi. I hope I didn't slaughter that. And Maddie is the Director of Community Education at Face Addiction Now, formerly Families Against Narcotics. She graduated from Central Michigan University in 2020 with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and substance abuse prevention, education, and intervention. Recently, Maddie earned her Master of Social Work degree from the University of Michigan School of Social Work, specializing in interpersonal practice and integrated health, mental health, and substance abuse. Welcome, Maddie.
So thank you for having me. Um, I was going to introduce myself, but Christy already did that for me. So just to clarify, my name's Maddie, and I Tortomasi, and I work at Face Addiction Now, which is formerly Families Against Narcotics. If you haven't heard of FAN before, we are a nonprofit that serves the entire state of Michigan, but we're centrally located out of McCall County, and we help all individuals and families that are affected by substance use disorder. And all of our services are completely free of charge. What I do is I oversee all of our substance use education and prevention programs across the state. So I'm really, my three main areas that I'm in are doing school prevention programs, trying to get those into schools, and then also working in a lot of hospitals, and then the police academy, and with our folks in the criminal justice system. So we really just sit here and try to talk about substance use, try and talk about drug trends, stigma, and how we can better serve our community. So today I'm just going to be focused on adolescence and prevention and what we can do as community members, as people who may work in schools or may work, with youth, like kind of what's going on and how we can assist them. So I am going to be keeping the chat open the entire time. So if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in throughout the chat. This may be like a lot of information kind of thrown at you. So feel free to, continually put in questions there. If you're not comfortable, sharing it to everyone, just message me individually and I just kind of keep an eye on it and answer as we go. So I always like starting off every substance use related educational presentation that I do with just the definition of substance use disorder. Substance use disorder is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits that can be influenced by genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experience. So a lot of people don't understand that substance use is a disease, and especially kids. So it's really important to just know the definition and to educate other people that it is a disease. So throughout this entire presentation, and anytime you really hear a presentation from FAN, we use the term substance use disorder or SUD. And when we just say that, we are talking about all substances. So, we don't really, unless we're doing a very, very specific presentation about alcohol use disorder, we usually just kind of talk about substance use as a whole. We may go into certain examples, but just know that when I talk about substance use disorder, SUD, or, just substance use in general with kids, we mean everything from opioid use disorder, alcohol use disorder, all the way to inhalants. Really everything is just this big umbrella term that we use. Hi, Lisa, and you will be getting a copy of the slides, and also the presentation is being recorded that you could use at a later date or view. So just to get an understanding of how many people are affected by substance use, 48.7 million people in the United States age 12 or older are struggling with substance use. So that statistic begins at 12. That means that 10% of our United States population has a substance use disorder. So kids as young as 12 are having a full-blown medical condition and are really, really maybe struggling. There's a lot of experimentation, but this really is a large amount of people that are affected. Also, 1 in 3 people across the US are just affected by substance use disorder in any way, shape, or form. So they may have a family member, they may be, in recovery or have SUD themselves or a friend. So it really is a very, very complex issue. It's a lot of people. It's not something that's talked about a lot, that this statistic is from age 12 or older. And I always get questions like, how does this happen? How does substance use, how does addiction happen? And substance use disorder is a brain disease. And there's two parts of your brain that are greatly affected by it. And your limbic system of your brain is your pleasure system of your brain. That's where you get all of your rewards. So anytime you eat a food that you're craving and you become happy, or you exercise, your limbic system is the one that produces that like happiness reward feeling. It's our very emotional part of our brain. So that's responsible, like I said, for happiness, joy, even things like crying and whatnot. We want to make sure, excuse me, sorry, it is highly responsive to pleasurable experiences. So anytime that you do something that you enjoy, that is the system that is rewarding you. So this is fully developed in childhood, so from a very young age. So that's why when kids get a toy or get to do something they want to do, they get really, really, really happy. You also have this other part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive part of the brain. So that is responsible for your planning, your judgment, your decision making, really, evaluating situations and thinking, what is the risk and what is the reward? That is not developed until you are 25 years old, when your brain is so, fully developed. And so from a young age, we can we receive like pleasure, and our brain, likes pleasurable experiences, but we aren't able to understand like the risk side of these scenarios. So when you start using substances, your brain starts changing. So your brain produces this neurotransmitter called dopamine, and it's like your happiness. It's used to regulate your essential behavior for life. And your brain changes with continued substance use. So dopamine is usually released with pleasurable experiences. That's what's making you happy. So when you use substances, your brain is saying, oh, this is kind of a pleasurable experience. And so it starts releasing more and more dopamine. So, as more and more dopamine is being released, it'll also become reserved for substance use or behaviors that are associated with addiction. And that's where like that compulsion comes from, and that I need to get it because my brain is telling me that I'm not happy if I don't have substances or I'm not using substances. And so that is happening, and that when kids start using substances really young, their brain is starting to rewire and really, really, really focusing on, that is the only pleasurable experience that they can get. But like I said, going back to the first slide, your brain that's responsible for understanding judgment, decision making, and risk taking isn't developed. So a child's brain, when they're using substances, is only getting the reward part of it and not understanding the risk part of it. And so a person will begin to prioritize substance use because that is the only way that they are receiving pleasure in their life. So when we talk about warning signs of substance use, I just have to sit here and say, not all of these warning signs may be the result of substance use. For example, the first one in the behavioral column, loss of interest in normal activities and hobbies. I lose interest in normal activities if I do not get 8 hours of sleep. So we want to make sure that we're not seeking out and like really looking at kids and saying, do you have substance use? Are you experiencing any of these symptoms? These symptoms can be associated with it, but they also can be associated with mental health, with health issues to begin with. So if you see a child or really anyone exhibiting any of these symptoms, it's just a sign that we need to check in with them and say that see if they're okay. Substance use may be a factor, but it may not always be the reason. So with that being said, there are 3 different sides of substance use, or like behavioral sides. So first, behavioral, physical, and emotional and psychological. Those are the areas of your body that are mostly affected. So your behavior So, like I said, loss of interest in normal activities and hobbies. Declining school performance is always the number one, sign that something is going on in a child's life, and we just need to figure out what's happening. Changes in friend groups. This is hard because, there's a big shift from elementary school to middle school to high school, or just throughout, going to school. I remember I had multiple groups of friends. So once again, may not be it, but if someone starts hanging around with a group of kids that, are demonstrating risky behaviors, that can be a warning sign. Secrecy, lies, and distraction. I've never met a teenager who's never exhibited those, three things on a daily basis. So it's kind of hard to tell. I think there's a very big myth that's associated with the addictive personality. Some people, may see a kid and they may have these really high interests in certain things, and they're like, oh, they have addictive personality. Addictive personality is a myth, but there are different behaviors that are associated with addiction, like secrecy, lies, and distraction. So just making sure that if someone's exhibiting these behaviors, may be associated, may not. Of course, mood swings, risky behaviors, just in general, not understanding that these can lead to consequences. We know, as we talked about, that's because their brain is not developed. So really driving home the risks associated with substance use is very important with kids. Isolation is very, very dangerous for people who are using substances and have a substance use disorder. Like I said, all of these behaviors can be the same for kids and adults. So if someone is isolating themselves, it is very, very important to check in with them. So financial issues, this can be very, interesting with kids if they're getting a sudden appearance of money. Where are you getting that? And if they are asking for money all the time, understanding why they need money and what they're doing with their money if they are spending it very quickly. From our physical sign, once again, not always associated with substance use, but these are kind of key physical traits that we can identify with people who are using substances. So, rapid weight loss or weight gain. This can be a very difficult conversation with kids, especially. It's body shaming is a very, very hot topic with our kids in general, but just checking in with them, making sure they're okay if they are experiencing those symptoms. Poor hygiene is always a very key factor. If someone is not, if they smell, if they're not changing their clothes, if they have unkept hair, dilated or pinprick pupils is go to, and we can see if someone's using a substance. So dilated just means really big, pinprick just means really, really small. Different substances give your eyes different effects, and it can usually be the most telling. Also, red or bloodshot, glossy eyes. Of course, your eyes really tell a lot. Unexplained injuries, changes in sleep patterns, like I said, unusual smells, slurred speech, of course, if someone's exhibiting that, that's always cause for concern. And then our emotional and psychological side of things, substance use creates depression, anxiety, and paranoia. Depending on what substance is being used, if there's any mental health issues, a combination of them, they can really exacerbate those symptoms. It also produces a lack of motivation and memory problems. It could be unexplained anger and aggression, inability to concentrate, of course, and then absenteeism and tardyism from school, sports, hobbies, or work is also one of our key indicators that something is going on. So we shouldn't take these symptoms today and try and spot out what kids are using substances and what are not. But like I mentioned when I first started the slide, is that this is really our telltale sign that we need to just check in with our youth and making sure they're okay if they're exhibiting any of these symptoms. So there are some risk factors that are associated with substance use, and they just increase your likelihood of developing an SUD. And this is really, really important to educate kids because adolescents do usually not understand if what makes them more likely, and that it's a disease, and that you may have a genetic component that makes you more likely to developing a substance use disorder. So our first key risk factor is a family history of SUD. So anyone who is in your family, biological, who is using substances, whether it's an aunt, uncle, grandparent, parent, sibling, makes you more likely to develop an SUD. So if there's someone in a child's family who's experiencing this, we should have open conversations with these adolescents to let them know. We shouldn't be shameful or have stigma towards a person who has substance use, but rather, this does run in our family, and that makes you more at risk of developing one. And therefore, we have to prevent using substances at a very young age can be very dangerous. And so we obviously want to prevent from a very young age. A lot of kids don't understand that the younger that you use substances, the more likely you are to develop a substance use disorder. And that's because it really alters your brain chemistry. And adverse childhood experiences and trauma. Substance use is a coping mechanism for trauma. So if any child has gone through, any type of abuse, divorce, if they were unhoused, if they've had food or clothing insecurities, it makes them more likely to developing a substance use disorder. If they've experienced any traumatic event, same with adults, it makes you more likely to develop a substance use disorder because you're going to use it as a coping mechanism. Mental health disorder, of course, it's the chicken and the egg situation. Is your mental health disorder causing you to use substances to cope, or is your substance use exacerbating mental health symptoms? And so it's really important that if someone does have a mental health disorder, a lot of kids are struggling with anxiety and depression, that they're not using substances as a coping mechanism. And then, of course, peer pressure. Peer pressure doesn't stop, and I think that's something we like as adults don't talk about enough, is that peer pressure continues into adulthood. And that could be, while you're at work and after work, someone's like, come on, let's go get a drink, or like, let's go to the bar, let's hang out. And people feel like they have to engage in these social norms, or, just have another one, or try this, it's not that bad. Like, in my personal opinion, I think peer pressure gets worse as adults than it does for kids. And we really drive home peer pressure for kids. But we need to really continue having that conversation into adulthood, and that like peer pressure is not okay. So one thing about adolescence is like risk taking is a normal part of development. And risk taking never stops. There's always a desire to try new things, to become more independent. If you want to, start a new career, that's a risk you're taking. Having kids, having a family, marrying someone, those are all in theory like risks that you can be taking. So it's a very, very normal part, but the conversation that we need to have with our adolescents is like the risks that are associated, and letting them really like weigh out what is happening, and that using substances can be very dangerous and can alter all these different areas in their life. So going into statistics and trends and really how we can support our youth. So I apologize, on that first slide in the alcohol it should say 15.11. But these data points were taken from, the University of Michigan, from a study, or, excuse me, they send it out every year to schools, and children fill them out. Obviously, we can think that these may not be the most accurate numbers because a lot of kids are afraid of openly discussing substance use or filling out these types of surveys. But this is the data that we do have. And what is difficult about adolescent substance use is it's very hard to know like the accurate data. But this is what we have. So this is what we can go off when we think about, developing school programming or prevention or having these conversations. So starting with our alcohol, like I said, the 8th grade one should say 15.11, but in 10th grade it doubles, and then it goes up again in 12th grade. So we can see that at 8th grade, 15% of 8th graders in Michigan are already drinking alcohol. So that's a pretty large number of students, if you're talking about the overall population. And then by the time you get to 12th grade, half of the state population is drinking alcohol. That's a lot of kids. And so really, there's a lot of prevention program that can happen for, alcohol use. And then it really goes up in college. So it's really, only going up, going up, going up. And when we talk about vaping, I think right now there's a huge, huge trend towards vaping. And these numbers are from 2023. There's a lot of prevention programs around vaping, which I'm not saying don't need to exist. But when our numbers are as high for alcohol and marijuana as they are for vaping, these prevention programs need to address all substance use. So one of the questions is drinking consistently or have tried. So this was a study that says drinking within the past 3 months. So it does, there's not a lot of data around drinking consistently. There is some data about having tried, but overall adolescent data is very hard to find, and this is what I really could find. Um, can you provide the citation for your substance use in the past year slide? Yep. I can't exit out of it right now, but all of the citations will be in the notes as well. It's from the University of Michigan. I can't remember off the top of my head. I wish I had the speaker notes open to see. But anyways, so vaping, once again, 23.2 of percent of 12th graders are vaping. 11.4 of eighth graders. That is a lot of eighth graders who are using vapes. I received a call from the local community coalition a couple weeks ago, and it was about an eighth grader who was picking up vapes off of the side of the street and using them to see if there was any liquids left because he was so addicted to vaping. So it is a very, very big cause for concern as much as all of these other substances. We are seeing in the state of Michigan, and at least from us who provide access to treatment programs at FAN, that there is a large increase of marijuana use for adolescents. That is most likely due to the prevalence of dispensaries. It's now becoming a social norm to use marijuana. And also, it is easier to hide and use versus when, all of us were probably growing up and all we had was the actual plant itself to smoke. Um, a lot of kids are doing edibles in school. Once again, we receive calls that kids are doing edibles in schools and we need someone in, recovery to come and speak to them. So this number really is going up. A lot of these numbers actually went down, but marijuana use is going up for our teens. And then our other illicit drugs, we haven't seen a large increase in a couple of years, but there are kids that are doing illicit drugs such as heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines. So it is still a big cause for concern, which is why it's important in prevention work to address all substance use and not just focusing on a vape program, an alcohol program, a marijuana, but talking about it as a whole because there is this group of children who are being introduced to and using illicit substances from a very young age. Another trend that we are really, really seeing is the prescription drug misuse trend. So when we think about historically, prescription drug misuse really peaked in like during the opioid epidemic where a lot of kids or a lot of people were just using opioids. They were being prescribed them, and they were using them, which led to abuse, which led to addiction, which led to now the fentanyl crisis. But the prescription drug misuse we're seeing with teens now is actually not opioids. They're still one of the top three common most misused substance due to like sport injuries and medical procedures, but it's actually the misuse of mental health medication. So post COVID, or during COVID, a lot of kids developed anxiety, social anxiety. Going back to school was very difficult. Depression was a huge cause for concern for everyone in general, but kids as well. And a lot of kids got prescribed prescription drugs, mental health medication. So a lot of kids then started misusing those medications. And we go into a lot of schools and we do a lot of work and talking to these students and asking them kind of what they're seeing. And they're like, everyone uses Adderall now. Everyone passes it around, or Vyvanse, or, Xanax is even a cause for concern with young people. And I think it's great that kids are now more in tune with their mental health, but there is a large surge of kids using prescription drugs in this fashion. And so 15% of Michigan high school seniors admitted to misusing prescription medications in one of the following ways. Sorry about that, at least once during the past school year. So they're either using medications for reasons other than why they were originally prescribed, taking else's prescription, or taking medication to feel high or get high or feel euphoria. And what is so concerning about this is that 10% of the national overdose deaths are people ages 15 to 24. So a lot of kids are using Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, social media accounts. They're getting it from their friends. They're getting it from their siblings or their friends of friends, and they don't really know where these pills are coming from. And it's leading to a lot of kids that are overdosing off of fentanyl accidentally and dying. And it is very, very scary. The amount of kids that have come to us and said, I think I'm addicted to Adderall, or I'm addicted to Vyvanse, or I'm addicted to, my ADHD medication, my mental health medication. It's really, really scary. So it's something that needs to be talked about more. Not a lot of data is collected about it, but we are seeing a lot of kids that are overdosing, and this number is going up while the national overdose rate is going down. The juvenile overdose rate is going up. So why should we be concerned about all these new things that are happening, the drugs that are out there, the information that we already know? Is that our drug landscape is completely different from when many, many of us in this room grew up. And over the past few years, it has drastically changed. So obviously, fentanyl has been around for, historically, a very, very long time, but in the illicit drug landscape, it's been around for a few years. But now there's new drugs like xylazine that are out there that kids are taking medications that they don't even know what's in them. They think that they're getting a Xanax, they think that they're getting an Adderall in reality, or an opioid, and they're getting something that is completely different. And they're not aware of what an overdose is, how it happens, or how to save someone who's having an overdose. Kids are not aware of the Good Samaritan law, that you can call 911 and you're not going to get in trouble if somebody's there and they're overdosing or they've had alcohol poisoning. We go into schools, and we did a small study last year with a Metro Detroit school. We went one-on-one, we interviewed, like, I think it was like 15 or 20 kids, and they told us what they wanted to know. They told us that they wanted to know more about the Good Samaritan, about overdoses, about the legal aspect of what happens if I get an MIP, what happens if I'm on probation, will I get in trouble for X, Y, and Z? They wanted to know more about, alcohol poisoning and other things that are prevalent with what's happening with them. So if you are somebody who's engaging or, doing a prevention program, I encourage you to, like, reach out to the students and think, like, and ask them, what do you want to learn? Because we came into this school with an idea of, like, we're going to hit on this, 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 and this point. We thought we knew what was best for these kids. And it ended up being completely different than what we originally thought. Kids want to learn about fake pills and want to learn about fentanyl. And I just saw here, increase in kids taking kratom is really crazy too. Kratom, we could do a whole other hour session about kratom and what is happening in that, but that's a really good point. Most kids think everyone is doing the thing, but it's usually much lower than they predict. So this data it depends, like, what kind of, I feel like data can be skewed because it depends what schools you're working in and how, um, for us, if we're working in a school that may be of a lower socioeconomic area, what they may want and how many kids are engaging in substances is completely different than what we may engage in a high socioeconomic area. So just depending on, where your community is, being really engaged and saying, what do you guys want to learn? Regardless of what data is telling us, we have to listen. And it's super, super important. So any parents, caregivers, any type of person who's engaging with adolescents, we should be staying informed about, these data points and what, the data is telling us, but also just listening and then doing research on what the students want to know as well. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm keeping an eye out on the chat. Um, So kratom is it's a legal substance. It is a mind altering substance. It's sold at a lot of smoke shops. I'm not going to go too in depth on it because we can literally have an entire presentation about it. But I encourage you all, if you haven't, I'm not an expert in kratom either, so I don't want to give out any false information. So if you haven't heard about it, definitely search a training on it. There's so many different ones, and they're telling, yeah, it's legal, you can buy it in stores. It is a substance, it's an herbal substance. There's a question here. If people use the Good Samaritan law and they get to the caller and the individual and the caller has heroin and needles on them or on the table, will they be arrested for possession or would they just take the drugs and dispose of them? That is a good question. I think law enforcement always has the final decision when it comes to that. But mostly when someone is overdosing, obviously the first concern is to address the patient who needs critical medical care. Unfortunately, a lot of times when individuals are overdosing, someone may call 911 and leave. When we talk about kids, it's just really important to know that kids will not be arrested and get an MIP or any type of charge if they are decide to stay or if the cops get called to a party. The first and most important thing is to take care of the patient who's in dire medical need. But that's a good way also when we talk about the Good Samaritan law, we're kind of getting a little off track, but I think this is important. When we talk about the Good Samaritan law and we're doing prevention programming in schools, it's very, very helpful to incorporate if the school has a school resource officer or if there's a police officer who's a great community partner, sits on a coalition. It's a great opportunity to bring them in and let them educate as well. Also rebuilds those relationships with people who are, maybe using substances and then the officer and builds that trust. So anytime that we get really, really deep questions about, Good Samaritan law, any legalities, I reach out to any of my trusted law enforcement officers and ask them just for clarification. When it comes to the court stuff, I used to be a probation officer, so a little easier for me to navigate those questions, but any type of legalities like that, always good to reach out to your community partners and get clarification to make sure we're telling kids accurate information. So, from a prevention standpoint, now we're going to be focusing more on prevention, intervention, and kids, because at the end of the day, this is the most important thing that we can do, is providing resources and support for kids who are curious or may be experiencing this or may have a loved one who's experiencing it as well. So, our protective factors, these are factors that make someone less likely to develop a substance use disorder. So if someone has family involvement and support, and this family involvement is a self-defined term, and I think that's really important for everyone. My friends are just as much as my family as my blood family, my biological family. So as long as, these kids, these individuals, just in general, people have a strong support group that they can lean on during difficult times and not result to substance use as a coping mechanism. Really, really important. With emotional control and high self-esteem, that is huge for kids. Um, Someone needs to be in tune with their emotions, knowing how to navigate difficult situations and be given the tools on how to navigate difficult situations. So whether that's reaching out to a loved one, having open communication with friends, with family, having a trusted person in their life, really making sure that, they understand that I'm going through a hard time and these are the steps that I need to take. Maybe I need to see a therapist, maybe I need a journal, maybe I need to go take a walk. If I get into an argument with someone or I don't feel safe in a situation, maybe I need to leave. Like those are all really key factors that we should be introducing to children from a very young age. And it's just going to help them not result to substance use when they are navigating a difficult situation. Community engagement, of course, if a student, if a child is engaged in hobbies, activities, sports, after school programs, groups, very, very critical. Obviously, if they have more things to do, they're gonna have less time to experiment. But making sure those people in those different activities are good, supportive people. Obviously, having friends, having support, just having people to lean on is super important. People who are more connected to their spirituality are less likely to develop a substance use disorder, and that's why a lot of that's why a lot of substance use self-help groups are, the 12-step program, for example. It incorporates a lot of spirituality because for people, they find a lot of solace and comfort in having, surrendering to a higher power. And then our early prevention efforts, the so important. When we talk about prevention, I think from at least my observation from being a part of the DARE generation is that like after DARE happened, there wasn't really concrete like prevention programs. A lot of prevention programs diminished through, from 2010 after really a lot of schools are not engaging in prevention programs, and right now we are seeing a very very high increase in requests for prevention programs at our agency. So a lot of requests that I'm getting are unfortunately reactive to a substance use event. I think that's a whole issue in itself, is that people want prevention programs after an event has, or a situation, incident has happened at their school, and may not be committed to implementing prevention programs as a preactive prevention effort. So, some schools are doing it and that's amazing, but statewide, and this is my observation, obviously no data, but there are not a lot of prevention efforts in some of these very, very large Metro Detroit school districts. And there can be, and it's really, really, really important to have prevention programs because 1 in 3 teens get information about drugs, alcohol, and nicotine from unreliable sources such as other teens, the internet, or social media. That is a lot of teens, a lot of teens. And a lot of teens don't know where to go or how to ask for this type of information. And it can be really, hard for them to navigate, like what is true, what's not. We know that drug trends change every day. There's not concrete evidence. It's a very hard navigate, or a very hard space to navigate for all of us who may work in it professionally, let alone a teen who's confused, doesn't know the truth, hearing stuff from friends, hearing stuff from family, or the internet's telling them otherwise. So there are a lot of different types of prevention programs that we can engage in. There are family-based prevention that we can do. School-based, of course, that's what I'm out in the community, between schools and community, that's what we're out doing all the time. Our community can engage in prevention a lot of different ways. There's also population-specific prevention programs, such as, hospitals or any type of where else. There's prevention programs for seniors, we do a lot of prevention work for prescription drug misuse in senior living facilities. Prevention doesn't exist just for adolescents, it's kind of a continuation. There is prevention in healthcare, and of course there's prevention in criminal legal, and all of these areas really need to work together when we talk about, helping out at our adolescents and having them understand the risks that are associated with substance use. So that's why I put it in this circle, is that as a community, we all have to show up and, provide whatever programs or resources we can for our youth. I got a question. What about impact on our youth and their introduction to substances, particularly marijuana, being that now it's legal in many growing up and seeing? As far as the impact on marijuana, and now it's a norm for them, so we are seeing an increase like I talked about with those numbers in the beginning. So there are, we talk about marijuana use a lot in our prevention programs because it is a norm now, but there are risks that are associated with it, and there's a big misconception that you can't be addicted to marijuana, and it really is affecting a lot of students in a lot of different ways. So that is something that should be addressed as well. Here we go, prevention rates is successful. All right. Can you say again why some things on here are darker? Oh, some of them are darker just because it's a color scheme. There's no like significance. Well, I guess you could look at it that way. But obviously family-based programs, school-based and community-based are just the more common ones that that kids are going to engage in, excuse me. So there's a lot of myths and facts about prevention and what we can do for and how we can advocate for these programs to exist. A lot of people believe that prevention programs expose kids to substances, which in turn causes them to use substances at a younger age. There's no data that proves this, that supports it, that says you are more likely to use substances if you engage in a substance use prevention program. Prevention programs reduce the risk of likelihood, or reduce the likelihood of someone developing a substance use disorder during adolescence. A big one that I always hear is, when we host like our parent information nights and whatnot, is my child isn't exposed to drugs and alcohol and wouldn't do them anyway. And 1 out of 4 Michigan high school students say that they were offered, sold, or given illegal drugs on school property. So this is really going to say that your student may not be using them or may not be doing substances, but they could be getting exposed to them. So even if if they don't want to engage, it may still be happening, which is why these programs need to exist. Strict parenting prevents teen substance use. That's not a guarantee. Strict parenting, overbearing parenting, helicopter parenting, if you will. It's not going to keep your kids away from substances. Substances are a part of our daily life. You can walk into a gas station and buy alcohol or cigarettes or vapes and whatnot. So they're going to see it regardless. It may cause them to be more sneaky or less likely to come to if they need help. Most teens will use drugs even if they think they are dangerous. This is going back to someone else's question. Research has shown that when teens think a drug is harmful, they are less likely to use the substance, which is why it is very important during prevention programs to say, the risks that are associated with substance use and that it can harm your body, your mind, your relationships, your school, and whatnot, so they understand. And then teen prevention programs should only be focused on alcohol, marijuana, and vaping. Like I said earlier, it should be a form of all drug use in combination and making sure we're really hitting on every single one we talked about in that umbrella. And also, talking about our legal substances, our illegal substances, over-the-counter medications. There's a new trend that kids are abusing Benadryl. So this is just an important conversation just to have substance misuse alone. It doesn't have to be very specified programming. So kind of going back to those different areas where we can incorporate family, we can incorporate all these prevention topics, ideas, conversations into all different aspects in our life. So in our family-based prevention programming, 60% of teens report that their parents have not talked to them about the risks of using drugs. 60% of teens. That is a lot. And that is really scary because usually our families where we can be very vulnerable, it can be scary to talk to our parents about substance use. But it is a conversation that needs to happen. So different things that, in order to make that conversation that a family can do, that we can recommend, is that, we enhance our family bonding, our relationships, we work on our parenting skills, developing family policies on substance use, whether that is discussing them or if there's any type of enforcement. Obviously, we want to make sure that we educate our parents to have a safe and supportive environment if a child decides to come forward and talk about substance use. So that could be part of the family policy. For example, my mother always said, if you need to get out of a situation, if you are under the influence, you call me and you don't get in trouble, but we will have a discussion about it later on. That's a family policy. It doesn't have to be, it's a no-go. We're not doing substances. That could be someone's family policy, but it may not work. Enhancing parental monitoring and supervision. This is always tricky. It's a big recommendation we give to parents. Obviously, no one wants to be micromanaged and whatnot, but the amount of scary things that are happening on the internet and kids are not receiving supervision for them or not receiving any parental monitoring on any of their social media apps. Kids are buying drugs on social media. It happens all the time. It happened when I was in high school. So we really, really want to recommend to, families, and I say parental, but that could be guardian, chosen family, whatever, that there is monitoring and supervision of like, what are these kids saying and what are they doing? So obviously we want to praise for appropriate behavior. So good behavior, if they are helping other people, if they choose not to engage in these situations, if they leave a situation, super, super important. And if you are going to have these type of family rules, making sure we're moderating them and we're utilizing consistent disciplinary action, making sure that one child doesn't get in trouble for using a substance and one doesn't. That could be kind of a common thing for, the oldest child versus the youngest child definitely was for me. But we want to make sure we're continuing our substance use prevention and education from parents and caregivers, not just hoping that it's being talked about in school. So, excuse me, some community-based things that we can do. What if 5 Americans live in a community with a substance use prevention coalition? A lot of people aren't familiar with coalitions. So educating our community members, our parents about these coalition exists and that you can go to a meeting and learn about all these things if it's difficult for them to learn on their own, which it is because this stuff is always changing. So really, obviously, probably a lot of us on here either are a coalition member, work with coalitions. We all know the importance. So what I've been trying to do in the community is educating them about the importance as well. But different things community members can do, they can research, research substance use, what's happening in your community, what are the overdose rates, target modifiable risk factors and strengthen identified protective factors. So maybe you're a community space that, there's a lot of overdoses, but you have these great community centers who are willing to host an event or to partner, doing painting or doing any type of community event or whatnot. Um, we can always encourage the community to see how substance use risk factors relate to community issues, obviously. And like I said, building on existing resources, join a coalition, or see your current prevention programs. How can they improve? And we can reach out to a lot of different people in providing these events or providing space to host events where we can, talk about these issues. We host a forum every single month, and it's a place where people can come and engage in the community and learn about substance use trends. That's always a good example of one as well. So school-based programs, I'm just going to touch on what we're doing in the community and how it is helping. We provide comprehensive education in person or virtually. We have flexible durations. Anything a school wants, we will do. We have various topics. We also have just a comprehensive educational program at FAN to begin with. So if anyone's interested in learning about these, you can request a presentation and learn about them yourself. We obviously, we see our trends, we kind of think we know what we want to talk about, so we do have some set up topics, but also we customize whatever and we go in and do whatever we need to do or talk about whatever we need to talk about. We also have a 5th and 6th grade specified program. It's similar to the DARE model, if you will, but it focuses a lot on risks, assertive communication, and empathy building. We have a graphic novel that we're able to give to like late middle school, high school, where kids can learn about substance use. It has an interactive curriculum that we perform. And then we also do a lot of professional development. Talking about adolescent substance use, it's equally as important to equip teachers to have the information to support their students. The amount of requests that we get of a teachers just not knowing how to navigate that conversation or to help a student who's going through something. So we provide that as well. So prevention programs can look different. They don't have to be traditional models. We are very, very happy to make it work. I think sometimes when we go in and we do these very, very traditional like lessons, it can be difficult for a student to understand it. So what we do at FAN is we always try and bring someone who's in recovery, who used substances at a very young age, who can bring that personal aspect to it. So it's not just like the idea of, oh, I'm never going to do that. That's not me. They can see someone who's in their community, who, may have experienced these types of things. I saw someone who's requested my email. It's going to be at the end of these slides. So, you can feel free to copy it down then. So most importantly, prevention programs should be long-term with repeated interventions to reinforce the original goal. Research shows that the benefits from middle school prevention programs diminish without the follow-up with high school programs. So it's not something that we should just do in 5th or 6th grade, like a DARE program or Smart Moves or Up to You is what we do. And then we just like let it go. Or we just do it in high school after there has been an alcohol related event at homecoming. It's something that school districts should constantly have, and it's very, very hard for them to fit it into their their schedules. I understand, I work with a lot of schools, but it's really, really, really important. So for me, working in prevention, a lot of the time it's just advocating for the importance of these programs and why they need to be in school, why time needs to be made for them. Because during these types of prevention programs, we also can provide the intervention of this is who you can reach out to if you need help. This is what you can do if your family member is struggling. And at every single time we go into a school or we do any type of adolescent programs, we give out a note card in the beginning of the session and we allow students just to write questions. And then at the end, we collect them and then we go through all the questions and we ask and answer them. But it's an anonymous way for kids to write down their true questions. And it really drives home that kids want these programs. And what I have done is I've taken those note cards and I've taken them to meetings with principals, with superintendents, and say, this is what kids want to know in our county, in our community. Like they want these programs, they want this information. They may not know that they want it at first, but once, we're in there, then they wanna know more and they want us to come back, or they want our cards. The amount of kids who say, "Can I have your number? Can I have your email so I can ask you questions?" And I still get them. And so it's really the hardest part is the advocating for these programs, but the outcome is super, super important because at the end of the day, these programs need to be happening, they need to be happening often, circling back because our drug trends are changing. Kids are engaging in different things that we've all of us in this room had done before, and it's a lot easier to get things nowadays, and it's harder to get off of a lot of substances. So just super, super important that us as community members really advocating for these programs. One, I feel like there should be a mandatory class from kindergarten to 12th grade on addiction awareness. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it can happen in intervals, and I think every single time someone moves to a different school, so middle school or elementary school to middle school to high school, these programs need to happen because you're introduced to new people, older kids, and you're gonna have new friend groups, different people have experienced different levels of things. And also too, one of the cool things about this type of prevention work is that in working with adolescents is that even if they're not the ones who are experimenting or experiencing these things, their loved one or their family member might be, and they may be getting the knowledge from a very young age on how to support their loved one. And for me personally, I wish that is something that would have happened through my prevention program. My brother still struggles with substance use, and when I was young, I was, basically told that he was not a good person because he uses substances. And I always look at that as like, what a shame, because that could have been an opportunity for me from a very young age to understand that my brother was sick and that he needed help. But for a very, very long time, unfortunately, I just thought he was making bad choices and he was hurting us. So obviously, we want to help as many kids, but we also want to support them and help them navigate their difficult situations by letting them know that these types of resources even exist. So it's a twofold, super important. So just to kind of wrap up, to summarize those three things, those three different types of prevention action steps that we can do for parents, we want to develop positive familial environments, increase awareness by consistent communication, and knowing your community resources. So many people don't know about their community resources or that even, for example, community mental health provides a lot of these resources. For our educators, we want to discuss peer pressure and substance use regularly, review and revise current programs, curriculums, and about prevention and implement new programs and interventions if they don't exist. And then lastly, as community members, we can assess the substance use patterns in your community by you can just Google overdoses in I live in St. Clair Shores, and you can get that type of data, or what's happening in my community, or there's a lot of other resources that exist. We always want to build on our existing resources and organization, partnering with them if there's programs like this that exist, reaching out to these different programs. Or host or attend a public educational session. For example, FAN hosts our monthly forum. We're always trying to get people to attend. They exist, they're out there. People just need to know about them. So we do have some additional information. If you go to stillaperson.com, here is where all of our stigma workbooks are located, our information about substance use. We give these throughout the community. You also can download a version of our graphic novel, which is specifically for adolescents. It talks about substance use and navigating the stigma and treatment and what a person may go through throughout that. So super, super super important to give to students or just to know that it is available if you come across someone who may need it. So lastly, just want to say thank you to everyone for participating in this. I hope there is one thing that you were able to take or different ways that we can advocate in our community. If anyone has any questions, I will be staying on. We have a few minutes left if you want to ask them or put them in the chat. If you don't feel comfortable asking them, you can always email me, or if you have interest about any of these topics, please feel free to email me. And thank you so much. We could be here a lot longer than an hour. That I definitely agree, Melissa. Are we able to order these books, Lisa? There is a pre-order on our website. We are just finishing the final touches. This has been a 1.5 year long project. So we should have them printed and ready to go where you can order them on that website as well.
I was just given a minute just to make sure there was no other questions before we wrap up. I do see there's a question about if there's something we have to fill out to get credit. We will run a report of everyone that attended this session, and you will be sent a certificate through your email for everyone that signed in. All right, I think all the questions seem to be run out. I want to thank you, Maddie, for your time today and sharing all of this very important information. And to all of you that attended this session, thank you. We hope you found this information shared valuable. Today's presentation is one of many webinars scheduled throughout the month of September. To see information and register for additional sessions, please visit our website at www.sccmh.org. Before we wrap up, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. A survey will pop up on your screen shortly, and we kindly ask that you take a few moments to complete it. Your input is crucial in helping us improve future events and better meet your needs. For those of you that are requesting professional credits, please allow 2 to 3 weeks after the summit has concluded and your certificate will be emailed to you. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you again, Maddie.
Thank you, everyone.